Company says I tip too high when I travel. Now I intentionally order more expensive food so I can tip what I think is an appropriate amount. When going over my expense report, my company saw I tipped 20% for lunch one afternoon. Lunch was $15, the tip was $3. They told me that is too much because I wouldn't do that with my money. Heck yeah, I do. I just took the better part of an hour of my server's time. The least I could do is leave $3. It's $3 for crying out loud, but rules are rules. However, my company is fairly generous, allowing me $75 a day to spend on food, which I never do, and that's about to change. For lunch today, instead of my usual salad or sandwich, I went for the lobster grilled cheese, and of course, upgrades my regular fries to the duck fat fries. Enjoy saving that 5% for the rest of my travel meal expenses. Edit, for those saying tip out of my pocket. I was explicitly told to tip using the company's money and just count it towards my daily amount. Edit 2, good grief people, this is not stealing or destroying the company. This money is already budgeted for when I travel, and this company isn't going under because Vilden decides to spend $10 more on food to leave a tip. The company is just fine. This won't be a blip on their radar. Now to the comments. We have a reasonable amount, quoted from the travel guidelines, toward food and drink. It flagged me for spending £5 on lunch. Ducking hell, that's like a chocolate bar and a bag of crisps at a services. This is so weird. The company I work for has us tip fairly because our company name is right there on the card. This was our specific policy at my last company. Don't be stingy, even if the service sucked. Colleague of mine's wife has a similar story. We all worked for the same multinational. She was working on a project that required a 400-ish mile commute about once a week. She'd get a 6 a.m. flight from a large airport, grab breakfast before she boarded, and be at work for 9 a.m. Her boss refused to approve her expenses because the breakfast went over the £5 limit. Years ago, this limit was fine. But they haven't kept pace with inflation, and whilst it works in our main location, it doesn't cover breakfast in the expensive airport. So, my boss's wife said fine and then exercised her right to travel up the night before. That's a slightly cheaper flight, but also throws in a dinner allowance, an overnight allowance she makes sure to use, and a larger breakfast allowance. After a couple weeks of this, her boss realized she was hammering his project budget and asked her to go back to coming up in the morning. She refused and cited how it's more convenient for her and her family. He put 2 plus 2 together and agreed to approve her breakfast expenses again within reason. Penny wise and pound foolish. Love that old expression. I had a trip to Europe once. Was booking well in advance. Ticket on Friday departure was $450 and Saturday was $2,800. They made me book Saturday because we are not supposed to waste company money for extra days in the hotel. Hotel and meals would be $150 max for the extra day. SMH management. I had one trip where they wanted me to fly halfway across Europe, stay for a week, fly back home on the Saturday, then fly out on the Sunday to the next destination, as the flights were cheaper than a direct between the two. I explained that the £50 difference didn't include my mileage traveling to / from the airport, which was £100 each way. They finally noticed it was worth the extra. I had a trip where the hotel I wanted to book was literally a few feet from the office building I had to work from. This hotel had breakfast included and free Wi-Fi. Our travel department wanted me to use a different hotel, as it was £3 cheaper per night. It was also roughly 5 to 6 miles away, did not include breakfast or Wi-Fi, so would be circa £25 more per day than where I wanted. Because of the extra distance, it also meant the time I was technically working from was before my contracted hours, so I could claim OT uplift. I got them to see sense in the end. After years of travel, I got that one also. Company policy is 15%, you tip 20%. However, on the same trip, I heard alcohol was too large a percentage of your last dinner. Well, that's because I was at the airport, and I had a $10 appetizer and an $8 beer as dinner. The next trip, I made sure to order the $10 appetizer and a $15 burger so my $8 beer wasn't too large a percentage. Both bites of the burger were delicious, though. Place I used to work had a policy that was you couldn't exceed X $50 for meals each day. Coworker there would go to a bar, order a burger or something, and basically tell the bartender that whatever was left over was their tip. He got a lot of free drinks. My last job had a very simple we pay you $45 per day for food. Spend as much as you like on whatever you like, spend more or pocket the remainder. I once got told you don't really get a meal for lunch if it's a half day of travel, so I started flying home at night to ensure I was over the half-day limit. Man, that's crazy. I'm thankful I worked at a place where my boss just basically said, just don't rob me. LOL, your boss sounds like a cool guy. So glad my company just does a flat per diem. Same. I don't have to justify food expenses. Which is easier when you're on a 2-week trip. Also, some colleagues are complaining about the amount. I personally never exceed it even with restaurants for lunch and dinner, equals I make money in the end. I don't know how they are doing it. A friend of mine has the same setup as his job, so he just takes a couple loaves of bread and ramen noodles with him, and pockets 95% of the per diem. I used to just ask for a non-itemized receipt at the end of the transaction, and if questioned I would say sorry, that's what they gave me. Someone I know was doing this and then they started demanding itemized receipts, so, when he was overseas he'd get them to write out an itemized receipt in the foreign language with random stuff or words on it. Our large company stopped allowing alcohol when traveling. We have to make sure alcohol is on a separate tab each time. My boss forgot to remove his vodka on his all-Russian receipt and somehow finance still found it and rejected the expense report. My old company wouldn't let you book a flight if it was a certain percentage more than the average cost. I needed to travel somewhere that had a 90-minute direct. However, it was something like $300 more than the average because it was nearly sold out. Average was like $250. So this flight was more than 100% more than the average. The system wouldn't let me book it. Instead, I had to book a flight with 2 connections. Total time was around 8 hours. Since I needed a full 8 hours of travel time, I had to go down a day early and come home a day late vs flying there and back in the same day. Hotel was around $400 a night plus $100 per day of food allowance. My hotels and food totaled $1,000. And I didn't work any during my travel time, so, to save $300, the company spent an additional $1,000 and 14 extra hours of my time, but at least the accountants were happy. My company does this too, with the exact same results. At the company I used to work for, we had a $35 per diem when we were in Vegas for trade shows. Now, $35 doesn't get you too far there, but we were always reminded that it wasn't supposed to completely pay for your meals. It was just covering the difference between what you would normally spend on food at home, and the cost of eating out all the time while you were on the road. Okay, fine. Then, somebody turned in an expense report where all $35 every day was spent on alcohol. That spurred a new rule. No more than 2 drinks per day could be expensed, so, from then on, everybody's first day receipt was for 2 bottom shelf handles of whatever they usually drank to keep in the room, plus mixers. A place I used to work at had its head office here in Melbourne and the US office in El Paso. One of the heads of departments in El Paso came to Melbourne and was expensing $100 a head for dinners for him and his wife every night. When asked to explain his claim forms, he said, "This is the standard of living we are accustomed to back home." The claims were rejected with the comment, "I've been to El Paso."